let's get started. We may have some more people joining us, but we'll go right to work here. I'm Paul Costello. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on Rural Development, and we're managing these forums for the Local Support and Community Action Team of the Governor's Recovery Task Force. Governor Scott, when he built the recovery effort, he divided his team into three parts. And the first part was really looking at the immediate financial needs of recovery. And he built a team that of real lead investors who helped businesses think about how to apply for PPP, how to receive other benefits, how to gear up, how to deal with crises, how to go to the bank when you needed to. And that team's been incredibly effective. Obviously, the state of Vermont has received more PPP dollars per capita, I think, than any other place in the country. The second group was really looking at the step-by-step reopening of businesses. What are the protocols? How do we look at our downtowns? What are the fiscal interim needs? And that group had a lot to advise the governor on in the first couple of months. Our local support and community action team is really looking at the long haul, and it also has a different focus. When the governor built the three, he knew that not all the answers to recovery and resilience are going to come from Washington, D.C. or even Montpelier, Vermont. In fact, people are stepping up all over the state as they are in Caledonia County. People are helping their neighbors. Businesses are helping each other. They're thinking creatively. Community organizations, regional development, Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, and other groups are rallying forward in any number of ways to move their communities and counties forward. And in fact, there's so much richness happening on the ground that the governor thought it would be really important for people to share in a crosswise way what they're doing, rather than think that the answers are top down. So we're glad to host this Caledonia County Forum, and it's an honor to be here with everyone on the line. I want to introduce Catherine from Catherine Sims from the Collaborative, just to say a word of welcome.
Hey folks, delighted and honored to be here with VCRD and NBDA and really all of you to have the opportunity to listen and hear from you about the challenges that we're facing and the opportunities to move our region towards recovery. So really looking forward to listening and learning from all of you and working together to create a vision for how we move forward.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and thanks for your helper. And then we have from NBDA, Dave Snedeker, who's a great old friend of ours and so active in the kingdom. David?
Thanks, Paul, and welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Northeastern Vermont Development Association, and we're the Regional Planning Commission and Development Corporation for the Northeast Kingdom. And a lot of times we're going to be involved in helping implement the solutions that we come up with to help our communities and economy moving forward. So like Catherine and VCRD and Community Action Team, we're happy to hear everybody's perceptions of the challenges facing our communities and ideas for getting back on course. So thanks.
So our plan tonight, thanks, David. Our plan for tonight is really to go into some depth on a couple of issues. We built a steering committee to frame these processes for the full Northeast Kingdom, knowing that there's a lot of ties between each county and a lot of organizations that work between the counties. That group identified the forum topics for the Northeast Kingdom. And tonight we're going to have forums on local food systems and food access, and then another on cultural and civic institutions, everything from the arts to nonprofits to NYU. And we'll look forward to thinking with you all in those areas. The idea of these forums is really about a couple of functions. One is to share best practices from outside the region, from other counties, from other communities. What are some of the interesting things that are happening elsewhere that could be learned from or copied or used in the kingdom? And then we want to gather those same things from you all and think about what Caledonia County is doing that's unique, what some of your communities are doing that are interesting, that we can beg, steal, and borrow and share with other communities throughout the state. We're also looking at how those the work that's happening on the ground and the creativity of Vermonter adds up in ways that could inform the governor and could also inform public policy as we move forward in COVID recovery. We know this isn't going to be an immediate recovery. You know, when this started, many people looked for a 2-month window. We're now looking at 6 months, and we may be looking for certainly over a year till we're in a full recovery. So we're going to need to work together. The other purpose of the forum is to listen and to reflect with members of our visiting team who have expertise from outside the state, working closely with the congressional staff, with the Agency of Commerce and others to provide technical assistance and support for local efforts, knowing that Dave and Catherine are already pretty connected to those folks, but that projects may spring up in all kinds of ways that could use advice, connection, and support. The agenda for tonight, in terms of the layout of the meeting, is that we'll go into breakouts, and in each breakout we'll have a discussion of some of the creative practices going on in other places. We'll think about what we want for our community, what you're trying to accomplish in this arena for the future of the county or your community, what's holding you back, what some of the challenges are, and then what are the promising practices, strategies, and programs emerging today that could be useful and that could also inform other regions. And then finally, what else is needed? What are some of the actions needed locally, regionally, or statewide to address these challenges? What kind of technical assistance, what kind of funding might be necessary to answer the challenges that you're facing? The two arenas that we're going to talk about are local food systems and food access, and then cultural and civic institutions. And I'm going to invite Nick Kramer to describe how we go to these breakout sessions.
It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. I know a few of you. My name's Ben Doyle. I'm an area director for USDA Rural Development. We're a federal agency, and our mission is to improve the quality of life and economic vitality of rural America. And we do that by making investments in the areas of housing, development, and essential community. And, I'm always very excited to facilitate conversations like this one because, you know, selfishly for an agency like ours, it's really wonderful to hear what taxpayers want to do with their dollars and really where the needs of communities are and where we should be focusing our efforts. And so it's really great to be here. And I'm particularly happy to be facilitating this conversation because I grew up in Caledonia County and still have a special place in my heart for it. So you know, Paul already kind of went over the kind of agenda that we're going to follow today. I'm going to be honest; it's going to be pretty structured in terms of, you know, we're going to ask questions, we're going to spend time considering them, and then we're going to move on. And the key to doing that, I think, is because, you know, what's really important and powerful about these kinds of conversations is that, as Paul said, it's not about Montpelier telling you what to do. It's not about Washington telling you what to do. It's an opportunity for policymakers to hear from communities and figure out what are the resources that can be brought to bear to help. And so we're going to have a very structured conversation in the sense that we can begin to aggregate all these different points of views from the kingdom, but also from around the entire state, and really come up with a kind of comprehensive series of strategies that might be able to help. And so I just want to also acknowledge Janelle, who is our newest intern at USDA Rural Development and who's going to be doing a fantastic job capturing all the conversation today in notes. So nothing will be lost, and really just appreciate Janelle being here today. So with that, you know, our topic today is cultural and civic institutions. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation because I think we all know that how essential that is, right? I think particularly in a time like this, when we often feel so cut off from one another, it reminds us of how critical those cultural and civic institutions are to be feeling like a community, to be being part of the community. And, you know, Caledonia County and the Kingdom in Vermont just has such incredible history and such wonderful organizations doing great work that I think it's really important for us to take the time to really consider, how are they doing? How can we support them? What does the future look like? Not just how do we recover right now, but how do we dream big for the future? So I think it should be a really fascinating conversation. And to kick us off, we're going to have a kind of just a kind of a spark story, a story of inspiration from someone who I'm sure many of you know, the executive director of Catamount Arts, Jody Freed, who's just going to talk a little bit about, you know, from his point of view as someone who's deeply engaged in the cultural sector statewide, but in particular in the kingdom, what he's seeing as kinds of strategies in this challenging time for revitalizing our communities and ensuring that our cultural institutions and civic institutions remain strong. So Jody, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing your wisdom with us for 5 minutes, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Ben, and hi everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of context, Catamount Arts closed our doors on March 15th, and we remain closed and will remain closed for the foreseeable future. So our 10,000 square foot art center is shuttered to the public. On March 15th, we laid off all 18 employees, our entire team. And we kept a small group of our leadership group working on a part-time basis remotely. And over time, we've increased that as we've started to pivot and figure things out. But a large number of the team are still in a very part-time status, I guess is what I would say. And I would say from all of the organizations that I'm working with and the groups that I'm working with, I think that there's a wide spectrum in terms of the civic organizations, just that term itself, it encompasses so much. But there are I think some clear differences between organizations. There's organizations that have overhead and infrastructure, and we fall into that unfortunate category right now because we're not able to use it. And then there's organizations that are more people-based. And then I also think there's a differentiation right now, especially during COVID. There's a lot of civic organizations that are focused around basic needs and essential services. And their experience has been very different than the organizations that are not in that categorization in terms of funding, in terms of the intensity of what they've had to rally to fill the need in the community. So I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of what we've done at Catamount, which is a little picture for you in that context. So we closed our doors on March 15th. Our team came together and we had to innovate very quickly and change to this remote working model. We made some priorities. The top priority was safety for our staff and for the community, and we wanted to lead by example in that area and get out in front of that. We wanted to focus around community engagement and remaining relevant and engaged with not just our members, but the community at large, because we felt very strongly that arts and culture were not only going to be an important part of the recovery once COVID-19 was gone, but going to be a really important part of people being able to cope with and deal with the isolation and some of the ramifications from COVID-19 itself. And then lastly, we really wanted to try and figure out partnerships, especially cross-sector partnerships, where we could find relationships and find ways to work with other organizations across different sectors. And so our team went to work doing that. Some of the product that has come out of that and that we've had some really great success with is we partnered with NVU and both the Linden and the Johnson campus, and we've got a long-standing, really strong relationship there where their interns are a vital part of our organization, and we've shared faculty, staff, and just for literally 20 years we've been working with them, and we wanted to support their efforts during this really hard time to engage the community at their location on their campus, and so we invested and bought a drive-in movie setup, and we already had our mobile stage, and we put together a series of, and it was the first series. There's been a lot that have followed, but we were the first ones that went to the state with the idea of the drive-in concert music series and put that together. And since then, you've seen that it's actually been a model that's been replicated across the state and a very wide range of scale. But for us, it's been great. We alternate. Every week we're on both campuses, but we've shift between movie and concert, and people come, and it's been a great success so far. We've had a great response, and that's been really exciting. So that was a way for us to engage across sectors and innovate. Another example of that is we partnered with Northern Counties Healthcare, and we are working with them through the Home Health Agency, and we're dealing with folks who are living in isolation. We're also partnering with the Agency of Aging, so there's two partners there. And we've identified individuals who are really struggling because of the isolation around COVID-19. And we're working with them through arts as a medium to deal with that isolation and create some community and create an outlet for them therapeutically. We're hoping this model could be replicated with other populations within the healthcare community who are negative side effects specifically related to isolation, depression, and COVID-19. So that's an area, we had for a long time been a part of the NEK Prosper and worked with those agencies and those healthcare organizations. And we have some different programs we've done with them, but we really went all in this case, and focused around creating this model. So those are two kind of concrete examples of us innovating. And as I've talked with other organizations across the state, I think every single organization I talk to is doing the same things. They're having to change their basic model because of the circumstances. They're having to get outside of their comfort zone and do things differently. And I think the success around that comes down to how strong the relationships you have in the community, and trying to figure out where you can best partner with folks. Lastly, I would just say, the arts sector, arts, culture, creativity in particular, because we're in the business of convening people, we were some of the first organizations to close, and we will likely be the last to open, especially those in the performing arts. And if you look at the professional organizations that represent performing arts presenters and venues, they're indicating that anywhere up to 90% of those venues may close permanently if this goes beyond a year, that there's just not the resources there to carry the overhead. And, to give you an idea of what that means for Catamount, we have ongoing expenses related to our building and our infrastructure that we're not using at all that are around $20,000 a month. And so even though we're doing this programming, we're being really creative and we're doing these things out in the community and I think playing a vital role, it doesn't address that fundamental issue that we're facing, which is the infrastructure around our organization that is unusable when the goal is convening people and bringing people together. So I think, Ben, that's what I wanted to share. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to go any further that you'd like, but that's what I had to share with the group.
I think that's, thank you, Jody. I think that's great. I actually have one question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just thinking about, and it's been so impressive to watch your organization, but others as well, the ability to innovate and pivot quickly, recognizing the challenges involved in doing that. I'm wondering from the cultural sector, particularly in the Kingdom, do you see any innovations that you think will be long lasting? Or I'm sure that there will be, but which are the ones that you see having the greatest effect moving forward?
So I'll start with the ones that I think are going to be the most difficult. And I think I'm hearing this across the creative sector, which is there was a rush to this online programming and streaming. And I think there's some value to it, but there's very little opportunity for monetization there. So in terms of earned income, that is going to be a really difficult area, I think. And it's an area that is very saturated. Where I do think there's going to be some long lasting change is again in organizations partnering together and this cross-sector approach. I also think that some of the the realities around COVID and the safety and just the way we do business is going to be different. I know for Catamount, I think that we've realized that there are certain parts of what we can do very effectively remotely, and that saves us money. So I think there's a portion of that that we'll continue doing within our team internally. I also think that we've learned an awful lot about how to take care of our patrons better, that will live long beyond COVID-19, just in terms of safety and protocols and those types of things. I don't know if that.
No, that's great.
The last thing I would throw in there, Ben, is we have put a real emphasis on advocacy, and really making sure that we're telling the story. And we've tried to have as many, and the advocacy is both in the newspaper and in our local media, but also with our legislature, with the governor's office, and on a national level with our 3 national reps. And I think that a big part for our civic organizations and our cultural organizations, if we're going to make it through this and be healthy on the backside, is we have to make sure the story is told and people understand the reality of it. So, for example, $5 million was just allocated by the governor to go towards arts and culture organizations, and that's amazing. It's a huge, important step. Yet we have already seen in this sector, we know $50 million in losses since February. So that $5 million is extremely important, but it's 5 million out of 50 million that we've lost. And so we have to make sure that story is told, and that advocacy piece is really strong. And I think that for everybody on this call, I don't think we can stress that enough, is being sure that we're telling our story and that people really understand what the position is of arts, culture, and the civic organizations in our communities.
Great. Thank you, Jody. I really appreciate your perspective as always. So, as Jody kind of alluded to, this is a broad conversation, right? We're talking about cultural organizations like Catamount, or the Fairbanks Museum, but it's a really wide-ranging one too. Like, what are those critical kind of institutions in our community that really, in some ways, help define who we are, right? Whether it's the kind of legacy educational institutions that we're all really proud of, or again, the cultural organizations, or even the kind of affinity groups of folks that get together around a common cause. That's a kind of civic institution too. And so what we'd like to do now in this kind of conversation is perhaps maybe even take a step back from COVID for a moment, if we can, that context, and just think about, what do we really want for our community, or what do folks in Caledonia County want for their community when it comes to their cultural organizations and their civic institutions? What's of value to you folks, and what do we want to see for the future? And I'm going to ask everyone to just be brave and just raise a hand, and I think I'll see you. But just please speak up and speak your mind.
If anybody's looking for the Zoom raise hand mechanism, if you click on the bottom of your screen on participants, a list should pop up on the right hand side of your screen, and next to your name there should be a little icon that says raise hand.
You can just raise your real hand too. Ann, I see Ann Lawless has her hand raised. Please, Ann. I think you're muted.
I don't see the raise hand. Okay. I would really like it if all of our municipalities were respected and seen to be as, leading institutions. I think in some of our communities, our town government is seen that way. Well, I don't know, actually, but I think in many communities where there isn't a lot else going on, there's no library, there's no art center, there's no museum, there's no historical society, there's no school. There are a few communities that just have the municipality. And I think we're generally perceived as the entity to complain to about the roads. but I'd like to see us emerge from this as being, really respected as organizations that can help everything move forward.
Great.
That's all.
That's great, Ann. So, I mean, just to kind of say it back, I'm going to say that potentially this is an opportunity, right, for some communities to think about an expansion of the maybe the perceived role of the municipal government in terms of helping a community move forward as opposed to just kind of managing existing assets.
Yes, I like that, Ben. Thank you.
Well, what else would we like to see when we think about Anna, please?
So thanks. It's so great to see everybody here. And I just want to echo a couple of the ideas that were already introduced. But as soon as COVID hit and the Fairbanks Museum closed its doors in mid-March, one of the first actions that was really kind of inspiring was we reached out and found some really helpful partners in other museums. So a collaborative consortium was created because of this situation that includes the 4 science museums in the state of Vermont. And through those discussions, we were having weekly discussions with the other museums that were facing, as Jody described, issues of infrastructure and overhead and administration and payment, and all of our business plans depend on and on traffic, and we're heading into a summer season where we're expecting a certain number of visitors, and we knew that we couldn't plan on that. So we started to ask each other and ourselves, what could we do? How could we reinvent, and how can we complement each other? And in the midst of a crisis, we saw some areas of commonality and areas of partnership that we hadn't seen before, including we've just submitted a grant for support for all of the institutions through the IMLS. That's something that we wouldn't have been able to pull off as individuals. And I think the way out of this, as others have said, is really through partnerships and through that reinvention process. And figuring out how we work best together and what kinds of things meet the needs of our communities and what additional communities we might have. For example, in the Northeast Kingdom, being virtual actually levels the playing field in some way, because you don't have to travel to, say, Johnsbury or to Sheffield or Wheelock. We can reach everybody the same way online. However, the online world is so saturated and so filled with really great content right now. We have to decide where's our competitive edge and what are we presenting and how do we best present it. So I'm eager to be part of this and thankful for your voices.
Great, thank you. So that's fantastic, and it's interesting that your comments echo Jody's and the idea of, like, through this crisis, in fact, there's been some positive innovation in terms of being more coordinated and connected. And I just want to shout out to Dave. Thank you, Dave. You're right. I think I've been characterizing this as a kind of Caledonia County conversation. That's probably not appropriate, even though I love Caledonia County. We really should be thinking about a kingdom-wide, right? I mean, I think we think of ourselves as a kingdom, and there's nothing worse than that, like, Newport, St. Jay kind of other ends of the earth kind of thing. We should really be thinking comprehensively as a region, because, and as your comments point out, that's really how I think folks are going to be successful. So just want to put that out there. Let's make sure we're talking about all of the kingdom. Who else wants to tap? Yes, please, Tara. I think you're muted.
And thank you very much. I found it really interesting or difficult to choose which breakout group. Certainly, I feel like every issue that there is really affect all of us. But I chose to participate in this one to really both, engage with the people that are working in these really important attractions type, or these things that bring people into our towns, and particularly focused on downtowns with and St. Johnsbury in general. So I really think about, in addition to places like Catamount and different theaters and venues that people could visit, I think about downtown as a cultural institution as well. And one of the things that we've thought about is this unprecedented time and how it helps. Like, it's that idea of the buy local movement really could take a shot in the arm, and yet, kind of as everyone's adding their need to the list, NEK businesses are not poised to like shoot online instantly and be able to meet their market where they are. So as we play, like we need, I feel both personally and professionally, ways that we can keep ourselves connected to our community, whether it's the town we live in, the town that our some of our main sources of commerce come in, really seizing on this opportunity to generate some allegiance, for Vermont brands, for Vermont shops, and just for showing up mentally, like emotionally, physically in our community. So really thinking about how we can use this challenge as a phenomenal opportunity for that, when we can go back to Dog Mountain and watch the Levitt concerts, or when we can go back to Friday Night Live and Island Pond, all these things that we're missing out on physically. And so all of again, those same things that Jody's thinking about is how does he bring media and all of these things that are going to fulfill people to where it is that they are? Like, how do we make sure they know, hey, maybe you could meet that business need here in this local business versus, something more further afield. So we have a great opportunity to definitely co-create some system change, at least here in the kingdom.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And I see Pam Parker has her hand raised.
Yeah, you can't see it, but I do have my hand raised. Thanks, Ben. I'm a member of the St. J Energy Committee, and I think our focus is on having as wide a picture as we can of this being one event that's happening. But with the climate changing rapidly, we're going to have other events. Maybe not the same thing, but we need to develop some resilience to keep coping with ongoing events. So the bigger picture we can have of doing that, the better, in my opinion.
Great. Thank you, Pam. And I see, Leah, you have your hand up, please.
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm with Northern Vermont University, and I want to echo many of the points that have been shared. One thing I can imagine, I mean, just the strength of community that came out to speak regarding what they value in their community this spring, and then as NVU has worked with a local advisory committee, NVU Strong, made up of a number of different stakeholders, really helped the university re-envision what it could be. And that input has been so valuable. And a lot of it does speak back to formalizing partnerships, the strength in these cross-sector partnerships. Jody mentioned the relationship we have with Catamount, and our students are integrated into their program. And we're looking across sectors as to how we can formalize those partnerships, have the students really be of benefit and value to employers and organizations with learning outcomes, but at the same time strengthen partnerships and offering space on our campus, potentially as business are looking to what can we do to look at our infrastructures or a different way to re-envision that, perhaps locating on the college campus as a way to help take advantage of some of the services that we can offer. So we are having conversations like that in the community, and we're open to all sorts of different types of partnerships and collaborations as we work both to re-envision NVU, but there's also such an opportunity as well at the system level statewide. And I think the voices that we're hearing from the NEK very well represented in that conversation, and we're asking that they continue to contribute to that conversation. Personally for me, it's a social justice issue. Access to education is so key, so critical for us, and we want to make sure that remains in the Northeast Kingdom and everything that entails.
Great. Thank you so much. So yes, please, Diane.
Well, I'm from Newport, so I hope it's okay that I came to this one, but I'm interested
Absolutely.
in institutions and infrastructure. One of the institutions that's important here in my neighborhood in Newport for low-income people, and every time I go by there and see the parking lot totally empty and lights dark, is the United Church. I'm not a member there, but they are very active in the community, helping out low-income people. They do the food shelf. They also have done community meals. They did the child care center for a while. They're also the gateway, serve as the gateway for our project, which is Newport Wireless Mesh. So they're very active, but they're not really able, as far as I know, to hold services yet. They do something online. And there is, I think, a real small group of really devoted, mostly older folks who do the food shelf and all those things. And I'm really concerned about what's going to happen over time if they really don't have the ability to get together in person and have that kind of fellowship. What that's going to do to their ability to stay together as an institution that's been there forever and ever, it seems like. And I'm sure this is true of other places, other such maybe religious organizations that do work in the community. I don't really have an answer for that, and I don't know what their thoughts are on it, but I'm really concerned about it because I think they have trouble getting new members anyway, and just the fact that there's really nothing in person going on that is going to make it even harder.
Thanks. That's a really important perspective. I'm going to try to pivot us now. I feel like we've heard some real common themes in terms of, what we want to see for the kingdom is, a result of innovation coming out of this crisis. But really, what I kept hearing about was coordinated partnerships, right? Formalized partnerships, coordinated partnerships, things that frankly can, to put it just in dollars and cents, like reduce the cost of infrastructure, right? That if we're sharing infrastructure or we're coordinating the ways in which we're putting together grant applications or different things, it potentially is more sustainable over the long term. And that kind of connected coordination will help us be more resilient over time. I want to shift it now to, and Diane, actually, your point was a really good one in terms of pivoting. What's holding us back, right? Like what's holding the region back, the entire kingdom around that kind of coordination or connection? What are the things that are holding us back from supporting our civic institutions and our cultural institutions the way that we want to, or holding them back from being sustainable over the long term? And I think that there's probably the obvious thing of the immediate COVID crisis, right? But as we think about coming out of this, what will be the roadblocks that we'll need to figure out how to overcome? So what do you folks see as holding us back right now? Cheryl, please. Yes, please. Thank you.
Cheryl McMahon, and I work at the Cobley Library in Lindenville, and I'm also an officer with the Linden Area Chamber of Commerce. So coming at this from a couple different angles. One of the things that we've seen with the library, it was closed. We're now open for curbside delivery. We just started this week having people come in for appointments, is the need for computers. The internet access is not equal in our region. We have all this digital content. We've added to digital content as everybody is doing. And what we hear over and over again is that people, they just don't have the equal internet access, unless they're hanging out their window and can see Burke Mountain and, from certain angles. So I think that is, and as far as for education, that is also a big drawback that we've seen with people trying to do schooling from home with their students. They're really, really struggling with this. So that's a problem. And I just wanted to mention, this may not be for over time, but in the course of the chamber, not being able to do like Stars and Stripes that we usually do in the summertime, we ended up working on a small grant, and we're doing a calendar addition to our website that we will be able to share with all, or with many other organizations that will have content management. So we'll have a snapshot of what is going on and what is available. in this area, so that will be a more coordinated effort. And people look for that. They've called for us too. Like, we didn't know that was going on. We didn't know this was available. So that is something that we'll be reaching out to other organizations on. But the internet access piece, I think, does hold us back in the Northeast Kingdom.
Absolutely. And I would also say, sure, like having facilitated a couple of these sessions now for the task force, it's the number one issue that comes up, to be honest. Yeah. And I think it's one of those situations. I mean, we all kind of know it. It was an issue before, and this has accelerated everybody's understanding of how critical it is to fix this. So spot on. I see Gretchen has her hand raised, and then Trish, I see you as well. Let's go to Gretchen and then Trish. Hi, Gretchen, I think you're muted.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes,
Hi,
thank
everybody.
you.
I'm Gretchen. I am here representing the Northeast Kingdom Young Professionals Network. And I think the challenge that we see first and foremost as the Young Professionals Network, and sort of related to some of the programs we're working on rolling out right now and communicating with local stakeholders and businesses and organizations, is related to making this region attractive to especially the next generation of kind of leaders who can help to support our communities and our growth in the economy as well, and just the vitality of the region especially. So what we're working on is rolling out and communicating with a lot of people like you in your positions who can spread the word about this Vermont Welcome Wagon project that started in Chittenden County and has since opened our chapter here in the Northeast Kingdom, as well as a Southern Vermont chapter just recently opened. So the idea is essentially to pair up folks like, the engaged community members that are all here today and really love this region and want to see it continue to thrive, with new people who are coming into the area. I mean, we're seeing all these folks buying up properties from other parts of New England or other parts of the country as well, looking for, rural lifestyle to get out of the city as a result of COVID. And so we're trying to capitalize on that. But I mean, even before COVID, capitalize on the folks who are coming to the area and make it more attractive for them to settle here and maybe start a family and maintain a job and integrate into the community. So the goal of the project is largely to make it easier for folks to take on those leadership roles that everybody here is in. And so that's kind of why I'm here, and really just excited to be a part. Thanks.
That's great. I mean, thank you for both identifying the challenge, right? This idea of making sure people feel welcome coming into the community, but also it sounds like you folks are already offering potential solutions. Trish, I think you had your hand up.
I did. With all due respect to Anne's great comment about, in particular, her municipality and leadership there, what we're finding is actually the lack of leadership from the select board, lack of connections. So when we're doing things on the ground, I'm part of a mutual aid group for Lowell, J. Westfield, in the Troy area. And, even when I'm on, and Nick knows this as well, when we're on the statewide Zoom meeting, everybody has the same thing. And so we've been wondering how NVDA, could be helpful. But we realize this, VCRD in particular has noted this as a challenge in the communities that they go to for visits around the state. But they are really missing, partnerships that could be what you're talking about, that could meet solutions faster, and the communities could be resilient. And so that's a challenge that I don't know. I don't give up in trying to find solutions, but this one is quite challenging. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention was, don't forget about partnerships with our schools, the K-12. Not only as their schools are community centers, but they need the connections, to Jody, to Anna, to everybody's, what they provide, and to 99 in Newport, because those are resources that are right there from people they actually know that they would be open to learning from and giving and back and forth. So I think while the top level is, the level of folks that are here tonight is great, I think, there's so much opportunity in this crisis that is being missed or deliberately ignored. And any kind of ideas or help with that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Trish. Can I ask a quick clarifying question? And then Jody, I see you have your hand raised. Trish, that the leadership challenge that you've identified, we hear about it all the time. And from your perspective in the comments that you just made, do you see the challenge as lack of new leadership, meaning new people getting involved in leadership opportunities, or is it leadership skill development and partnership development for existing leaders? Does that make sense? Or is it both? Or?
Yes, but you're putting it very nicely. I think, many of our towns have select boards, that are, have been in place, by the 2 families, 3 families for quite a long time, or otherwise are, just happen to be there and, don't see, and I don't know where they could get this kind of I find that very interesting, what you just brought up, skill mastering or engage in community engagement, again, a town, they're just like, right now, it's like, yeah, you're doing great. That's, yeah, you, but, the town clerks have been fabulous. The planners have been great. The fire chiefs have been fabulous. But, there's this clear disconnect with our leadership that everybody in town wants to know, like, well, what do they know? What connections, and opportunities are we missing because they know it, but they're not sharing?
Okay. Thank you, Trish. Jody, do you have something you want to share?
Yeah, so back to just what you had asked as the question, what we'd like to see come out of this. And one of the things that I would like to see come out of this is that the cultural and the civic institutions, that there's a paradigm shift in terms of how we look at that, in terms of its relevance in communities and how it's funded, and that it's looked at as basic infrastructure that is necessary for the health of communities. And if there's one thing that's come out of what we've seen with these groups that have risen, and there's been heroic efforts, people working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, volunteering their time. To Pam's point with climate change, and I mean, Bill Gates, I don't know if anyone heard him yesterday, but said, COVID's nothing. Wait till you see what's coming. So, if we're going to position ourselves for resiliency long term, we need to think differently about what are the core needs of our community, what are the basic infrastructure, and how do we fund that? And to give you one example of that, from on the arts side of things and arts and culture institutions, we are out of the state government, we see $1.16 per person in spending. And if you look at that relative to other states, that's very, very low. And I'm not saying that the state funding is the solution. I think we need a whole paradigm shift here. But the premise of what I'm saying is that we can't have all of these institutions that are at the core of our survival and resiliency being hand to mouth and competing for sponsorships and local donations, and that be how we look at long-term resilience. So I think we really need to have a big, broad discussion of how can we look at this as necessary core infrastructure to take care of that financially long term.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. And it's a really fascinating thing to think about in terms of, it's very easy for people to wrap their heads around stormwater infrastructure. It's somewhat more challenging to think about cultural or civic infrastructure that might be a little bit more amorphous, but might be just as necessary. Leah, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I've been having a lot of conversations regarding lifelong learning and the need of various employers in various sectors needing a way for their employees to upskill. Or, for example, if they have employees that they want to promote up into supervisors, but yet they need to kind of teach them some of the supervisor skills. And having that kind of upskilling courses or that continuing education available, but particularly for small institutions, they may not have the funding to help those employees get that training, get that education. And so NVU is talking about building these on and off ramps where it might just be a certificate or a particular one course or a couple of courses just to upskill. But if you wish, can ladder up to then lead into a degree program, but working with some of these industry sectors to do that. But certainly right now we're hearing that there's not a lot of funding available to put towards that type of professional development. And again, for the smaller businesses, it's really difficult. So those are some of the conversations we're having about how to make it feasible, aggregating it, making it online, making we go to where they are to offer the courses, but also working in tandem with the K through 12 and the vocational schools to create a pipeline, a very direct pipeline. So when the student graduates, perhaps from a vocational school, if they wish to do some further upskilling or certification in supervisory skills or something, that there's a pathway established for them. So some funding to assist with that would be really helpful.
Great, thanks. And that's, I think that's actually, I'd like to, again, pivot the conversation and change it a little bit. And Leah, that's actually a really great example of, are there promising strategies, practices that are emerging today in your town or region to help maintain the sustainability or vitality of these institutions that we've been talking about? And we've already heard a lot of them, right? Like Anna, when you're talking about new partnerships that have been created with other museums, right? And or Jody, when you've talked about some of the innovations that you started us off with, certainly at NVU, we're seeing that start to happen. But I'm wondering if other folks, maybe folks who haven't had a chance to chime in, could just talk about, are you seeing anything that you feel is really positive in terms of, again, supporting our cultural and civic institutions in this time? Don't be shy. Anne, please.
Thank you. I was point really stuck from what Trish said, and then how you asked a follow-up question, pinpointing the difference between old leadership in, let's say, in municipalities needing new skills. I'm really, very paraphrasing here, versus drawing in new people. And I'm really curious to see how to know, maybe Catherine could give us an update on how the Leadership Institute, the Northeast Kingdom Leadership Institute, is coming out, because there was, I believe, at least a little bit of a focus on, our municipal infrastructure. And so I guess that's a question. And then I'd like to just suggest that we could figure out some way to do some kind of almost like an AmeriCorps program, or someone could have an internship. I mean, I can see a huge need where some young techie person could help an older person who's not very technologically savvy just be on a Zoom call, because just having to be on Zoom, that's a huge barrier. We thought it was bad before, but it's just sort of made everything, the pandemic has made everything worse because it's sharpened the divide in people's skills.
Great. Thanks, Anne. Catherine, do you want to talk about that idea? Any kind of emerging strategies that we're seeing in the kingdom around leadership development that seem promising?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Anne. Ben, I think it was you on a conversation the other day who highlighted that, the specific projects and initiatives that we implement to help our region recover are really important, but maybe even more powerful outcomes are how do we build resiliency and capacity within our communities that will help us deal with the challenges we face right now and build the capacity that we need to face future challenges and build a vibrant, thriving region. So
it sounds better when you say it.
You know, calling out this is an opportunity to really look within our own communities and assess where there's leadership potential and make sure that we have support. Feels really vital and an opportunity that we don't want to miss. We did just wrap up the Northwood Stewardship Center, just completed its first cohort with the Northeast Kingdom Leadership Institute, a 6-month-long program for 13 folks working within the region to do intensive training around leadership. And we are in the process of reflecting on that first year and building the curriculum and program for year 2. Folks will have an opportunity to apply to that program coming up here pretty soon in August. So excited to have that program emerging and growing. We've also been supporting a women leadership network. Anna has been doing an amazing job facilitating that in partnership with the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, and we're excited to be wrapping up our first cohort and looking ahead at what the coming year will be looking like. I also wanted to call out Front Porch Forum. I think that's a really critical tool that we have in our toolbox to promote community engagement and civic leadership. We just hosted our first training with Front Porch Forum focused on municipal leaders to understand that tool and learn from others within the community about best practices for using that as a platform for inspiring engagement within communities. And it was really successful, and we look forward to replicating that in the coming months, maybe targeted at additional key stakeholders like libraries and nonprofits and businesses, so that we can all continue to build communication and leadership skills within our community. I think, as we've heard everyone highlight before, this is a time to really look within and build our own capacity to solve the challenges that we face and long-term resiliency from our communities.
Thanks, Catherine. I would also just too, I think probably a few of you are familiar with the work that VCRD has done statewide too, around the Vermont Council on Rural Development has done statewide around leadership development, that there's some exciting initiatives happening there too. But Catherine, I'm just struck too by the idea of Front Porch Forum, right, as a kind of cultural civic institution that I've never really thought of it that way, but clearly that's what it is, right? And it's going to be moving forward, and to think about how do we activate new kinds of civic infrastructure.
And
anybody else have? Yes, please.
And I something that Catherine's remarks were great and really reminded me, and I was glad to hear about that update of those leadership programs. It reminded me of this thing that I feel like I even when I went through VLI, and I consistently am looking for these development opportunities, leadership type development. But it's funny, I'm going to be like completely transparent here. Like, I'm always like, ooh, is a leadership thing right for me? Like, why would I take a leadership thing? And so I've been involved with this group, the Boston Fed funding for this systemic change type grant money that really challenges communities to think about really looking at the whole spectrum and developing systemic change as a result. And I'm wondering, and just want to throw this out, if there's some phrasing that we can use that means leadership development, but is maybe more inclusive, because thinking about the group that the FinCan, that the financial wellness group here in I don't think it's Kingdom Mind, but here in St. Johnsbury that I've been working with, I don't see that there is a one word fits all for what we mean. And when we say it's really going to take all of us, it's definitely going to take the people that do live here, and for them to feel this ownership and this righteousness around participating in decision making, which is leadership. But I don't think they're going to take advantage of that with that word. So I would love help thinking about what that looks like, because I know I need help here.
Thank you. That's a really well said. And I think, maybe an emerging strategy, right, is really even reconsidering the way in which we talk about leadership and the kind of structures that we have in our community to demonstrate leadership.
So can I just jump on that, Tara? When we were thinking about our summit last fall, which we were sort of envisioning as a leadership development summit. We really explicitly did not call it a leadership development summit because, sharing those concerns that that might feel like something for somebody else. And we wanted that event to feel like it was for everyone. And it makes me think about the broader question of how have we defined what it means to be a Vermonter? And is that, do we talk about that in a way that is as inclusive as we want it to be? And, so that everyone can feel welcome on the fire department or the select board or in every general store, whether you've been here for a minute, a year, or 20 years. Because I think we know it takes everybody and that our communities are better off when we have diverse perspectives and experience. And, is there a way that, being a Vermonter or being a Northeast Kingdomer or whatever the right word is for that can mean some of those things around leadership, that those are our values about how we all show up and engage in our communities in a way that's welcoming and inclusive for everyone. And I think maybe there's some work to do around that messaging.
Great, thank you. Anne, would you like to contribute something? Is your hand up, Anne? Oh, I think you're muted.
No, I was just waving at somebody.
Oh, okay. Great. Anybody else have anything that they want to share? Again, thinking about these kind of civic institutions that are so critical, or the kind of infrastructure that makes our communities what they really are. Any other kind of emerging strategies that we're seeing?
Since I had an opportunity, I'll say something.
Yeah, great.
But I guess I'm sitting here feeling really pessimistic. That's awful, but that's the way I feel, because I think it's correct to say that this may just be the dress rehearsal for future issues that we have, that we're going to have to deal with, how we mingle in society, because we'll need to be worried about spreading things. And I've always felt that the thing that we really need in Newport and is important anywhere are spaces where people can physically get together and socialize and meet different kinds of people and do stuff with each other. And to me, this is like just a horrible blow to that. And I know that we can adapt by going online, but as everybody is saying, and I see it a lot in what I do here, is that this just leaves low-income people, a lot of them, in the dust. Not because, we can give them access to the internet, which was what we're working on here in Newport. And it's a different problem than what Catherine's working on, because we have tons of internet here, but it's just that at $100, $150 a month, people can't afford it. So they need something cheaper. So we're working on that. We give them devices to use, but on top of that, they don't have the skills to use them to best advantage. And so we're also trying to do education. And because I'm an old person, and because a lot of the people I associate with are older people, I'm hoping that this is just a problem with them, with us. Tara, the younger person, I'm wondering if you know how it is or if somebody knows what's going on in the schools to make sure that people know safely how to use the internet, because the education piece is, to me, the biggest stumbling block. And I guess, I don't know, I'd like to think of something more optimistic, but I really can't. I don't know.
I think, Diane, you're really touching on a real fear, right? And we often talk about access to the internet, and I think sometimes the shorthand version of that is physical infrastructure, but it's more than that. It is affordability. It is access in terms of knowing how to use that resource. And a lot, I think what we've seen, again, through this crisis is that it can exacerbate the kind of divides or barriers that already existed. Jody, did you have something you wanted to say? And then I'd like to actually pivot us to more ideas for action that we could share with the task force.
We can pivot and I can work it in there.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Well, then let's do that. What I'd like to do now is, thinking about where we want to be, what are the barriers that have been holding us back, some of the promising strategies that we've heard or initiatives that are kind of ongoing. What do you see? And this, I really just want to emphasize, I think this is a really critical part and opportunity that you folks have to share and to articulate, your perspective from the kingdom, but also that will be shared statewide with the governor's task force, right? So what we're asking for now is what additional ideas for action still need to happen regionally, locally, or at the state level to address the kind of challenges that we've had, and to work towards an equitable economic recovery and resiliency moving forward. So in other words, this is the part where you say, this is what needs to get done, right? And, ideally we're all working on it together, but what do you see as action that needs to happen? And we've already gotten some really good examples of whether it's expanding the definition of a Vermonter, whether it's thinking about cultural and civic infrastructure differently and how we fund it, whether it's increasing access to these kinds of institutions, but what else needs to happen? Trish.
Thanks. I had the opportunity of being part of a team that reviewed over 50 applications for grants a couple of weeks ago, and it was stunning to us how many businesses were not dealing with the new reality. They wanted to build something like it was, last year, 2019. So I think, in all of the different aspects that have been brought up, it's really important to keep challenging, as Jody, brought up, is really challenging organizations and individuals and municipalities. It really is a new world, and we really do have to pivot. And we really do need to be inclusive. If nothing, we've learned, more about, working together, even though it's been hard and it's been difficult and there's been a lot of tension. We recognize that it's value. So I think, again, just make it intentional that really this is a new world and we need to look at this differently with innovation and partnership.
Great. Thank you. Who else? Jody, is this an okay time for you to add your part?
Yeah, I have something very specific that I think it would be great if it got out there, which is ventilation. And it's why we're not open at Catamount. I'm guessing we've heard there's churches that aren't open. It's one of the single biggest issues facing every school right now. I spoke with St. Johnsbury Academy this week, and they're figuring out literally how to retrofit windows with fans to bring fresh air in because they can't deal with on the timeline the overall HVAC issues. We're talking about kingdom-wide a multi-million dollar retrofit to bring our ventilation systems in our infrastructure up to speed and to deal with the new reality that we're living in. And that's going to include filtration systems, whether it's UV or whatever. I don't know if anyone else has had the opportunity. Harvard put out a great report. It's free. It's online about buildings. Go read it if you haven't, because they bring up the really basic issues that every building moving forward has to address if you're going to be able to operate and operate safely. And so, Ben, as we talk about this and we talk about very specific things that funders could rally around, this goes across sectors, this goes across communities, and this comes to the heart of us and our ability to be able to function if we're going to have anything other than a all online environment in the future. If it's going to be hybrid or there's going to be an in-person component to it, ventilation needs to get dealt with. So there you
go. Thank you for being very specific and I'm just the facilitator, but I have to say, like, from where I sit at rural development, and we work across both states, both in Vermont and New Hampshire, this issue has come up like consistently. We're constantly getting phone calls for folks who are looking for funding to retrofit their buildings. And when you think about the number of schools that we have and the already strained educational system and the retrofit that needs to go into there, it's an enormous resource challenge. we got to get some strategy around it. Catherine.
Can I just jump on that and double down on the school side of that? We all know that our schools have really struggled to maintain facility maintenance for decades. And this is only going to exacerbate that further. And there is an advocacy opportunity here for folks around the weighting study that was published by UVM earlier this year, which looked at Act 60 and the funding formula and exposed that the funding formula has chronically underfunded our rural high poverty schools, which has led to a lot of the challenges around facility maintenance. There's an opportunity right now to advocate and that our legislature take action on those weighting study recommendations to help ensure that our schools have the resources they need to invest in HVAC systems to ensure the safety of our
Thanks, Catherine. Dave, did I see you raise your hand?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat room also, but Efficiency Vermont I've met with this week, they offer free indoor air system audits. So for schools right now, it may be expanded later on, but worth checking into.
Thanks, Dave. That's a great resource. Anna?
Thanks. I just want to make one final plea that whatever we do as a group, I know this was a Caledonia group, but that I see the solutions being regional. I think the Northeast Kingdom really needs to come together. We have more in common than we don't. And we work well together. There's a lot of complementarity. I also think there's education people have mentioned, but also healthcare is a major employer, and it's a major part of what makes the Northeast Kingdom work. And we need partners, strong partners in the healthcare system. And then finally, I think as a region, the Northeast Kingdom stands to gain a lot through attention to tourism and second home ownership, and how we're viewed by the outside, and especially those people who I'm hearing more and more stories of people who are buying up land and homes and see this as an opportunity to move to this area. And as Gretchen has alluded, how do we make sure those people feel welcome and that they want to stay, and that we have the infrastructure to keep them here?
Great, thank you. And Gretchen, I see that you have your hand up. Would you like to share something?
Yeah, something that is very, sort of simple, and maybe not also so simple in ways because of the internet connectivity issue for people in this region especially, is completing the census. I know, we can capitalize on something that is, kind of hammered to us in many ways, but if there's any way we as community leaders can make it more accessible for people to complete that can also help support our communities. I think last I checked, Vermont was like 46th out of 50 in terms of response rate. So we're trying to push that out as the Young Professionals Network. It's a very simple little thing, doesn't take long.
Thank you. And Leah?
I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the very simple fact that education and access to higher education is one of the best ways to build resiliency and to break generational poverty. So fully funding the Vermont State College system, yes, it does need to re-envision and it does need to make changes as a system, but it also needs to be funded because the return on investment is huge for the entire state of Vermont, both in growing the workforce that we need for the future, but also in helping keep our young Vermonters in state.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have ideas that, and again, these can be big picture things that need to happen at the state level, but they can also be things that can be happening locally. I'm thinking of it, just that welcome wagon example is such a good one, right? That's not, that's a very local solution that helps us create the kind of community that we want to live in. Does anybody else have any other suggestions, whether it's, again, statewide level, regional level, or the very local level? Any other ideas? Well, how about Representative Feltus? Can I put you on the spot? Any ideas from your perspective, or maybe even just reflect on what you've heard so far, what you see as key actions that you feel need to happen? Sorry, I'm shameless. I can't take the sound of silence.
That's okay. That's okay. I think coming out of this, we need to maintain these new cooperation and new collaboratives that we put together, because I think that's extremely critical in order to move forward. And I'm proud of what many local organizations have done. They've been creative and they've tried to get collaborative on that. But we need to break down those silos between not only all of these various organizations we have, but within state government as well, to make sure that there's some cooperation along those lines so that we can go forward in a more coordinated fashion. And I think, from a statewide perspective, my concern is always the financing. We need to take a good hard look at how we fund state government and what we fund with state resources. And I think coming out of this recovery or getting into the recovery may change some priorities that people are looking at. And by getting ideas from local communities, I think it may help re-envision some of what we do in state government and some ways in which we spend money. And I think that's an important discussion to have and a reflection to have.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that perspective. Anybody else? I guess I'll give it the last call on, and then we're going to hear from folks on our the recovery team are going to share just some strategies that they've heard or have. But does anybody else have things that they think are really critical that needs to happen either at the local, regional, or statewide level? Kind of strategies that the governor's task force should consider to ensuring that there's an equitable economic recovery?
Ben, I don't know if you're hearing this from other communities or not, but I get a lot of calls, especially from the chamber side of it. We have so many sole proprietorships, so many people, they're owner operating their business, trying to deal with the flood of COVID information. So I don't know if there's something like you had navigators with Green Mountain Healthcare navigate to go into these buildings. They're just like, just give me the bottom line. What do I need to do? Whether it's PPP or the money that's coming in, they don't have the time to deal with, are we open? Are we curbside? Do I have help? Is everybody safe? Do we have hand sanitizer? And these applications, I'm hearing that a lot. So I don't know if there, some way to have not a hand holder, but someone who could assist with that. I know they get it from some of the other organizations and NCIC and NVDA. They've done a great job with helping with grants and loans and things like that. But I think we're just seeing people that are swamped. And as a chamber representative, we'd like to know, if there are other strategies for how we can help in some way, that what is the businesses that need coming out of this, or really going right through the middle of it, because that's where we are now.
No, that's really I love the way that you put that. I think you're right that we're seeing an increase in technical assistance providers and opportunities, but really focused on the kind of the business side in terms of financially, how do you weather this? But thinking maybe of it a bit broader, that idea of like a COVID navigator to really help you think kind of comprehensively about how your business, not just the books, but how you're going to kind of reimagine what you need to for your community moving forward. I think that's a really neat idea. Any other kind of last ideas for actions or opportunities that the state or locally we could be thinking about to help build a resilient recovery? Okay, so hearing none, I'm going to go to the kind of the last portion of our program, which is where the recovery team is just going to share strategies and resources available to help communities and regions move forward. And I think, we've heard a lot of acronyms, a lot of partners, a lot of talk about partnership, but this is the point at which whether it's Jody, Dave, Catherine, anybody really. Sheila Reed from Senator Sanders' office would love to hear from you too. If you have resources or strategies that you're seeing either region-wide or statewide that you think folks on the call might want to think about in terms of how to move forward.
This is
Dave, would you like to begin? That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll start. Well, thank you everybody for all of the input. It's a lot of the things that we've heard before, but some new things as well. I can share some things that I do know that are underway, and some of it was underway before the COVID situation. So we'll start with broadband. A few years ago, the legislature authorized localities to take the matter into their own hands and form communications union districts. So we're seeing this initiative statewide. So towns join together and try to help solve their own broadband situation. And then on our region, it's the NEK Community Broadband. We've got, I think it's up to 28 towns now working on multiple feasibility studies, business plans to apply for funding, eventually apply for funding to build out improved broadband in the region. So that's encouraging. And the state has been able to shift some of the CARES money to help that initiative in some ways. It needed to be related to the COVID situation. But I think the legislature will see going forward that this needs to be a sustained effort to continue building out broadband. So if we're in the situation again, hopefully not, but we'll have better access to accessing the goods and services that we need, and also allowing businesses to move to an online platform. So to Cheryl's point about the technical assistance, we've done, existing organizations have done a good job, I think, including the collaborative NCIC, our organization, SBDC, and others, in the chambers, getting word out about the economic recovery programs that have come through the Agency of Commerce and the tax department, and starting at the governor's level. And so that's important. But going forward, I think there are multiple funding applications going in right now that we're going to be looking at creating these navigator type positions around the state to help businesses as they come out of the current situation, because the needs are going to be varying and very widespread. So we need, I think our current network is probably not robust enough. So this additional funding to bring in more people will hopefully help. And I'll stop there and allow others to talk.
Great, Dave. Thank you for those updates. Catherine, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dave, for all of those great spotlights on things in the works. And this has been a really helpful conversation to hear from all of you about the challenges, gaps, and opportunities. And so this has been really inspiring for me to hear. A few things that I maybe would spotlight as resources or initiatives that are moving forward. One is the Get Naked campaign. If folks haven't seen that already, that's a regional marketing campaign that was initially really focused on tourism lure, attracting people to our area. That obviously has been paused a bit as we don't necessarily want as many people from elsewhere coming away, but is really pivoting opportunities for folks who live in the Kingdom or in other parts of Vermont. And so, that's something that is ever evolving, and the more stories we can gather from our communities and feature how to get connected and enjoy this place and invest locally in our community, I think that's one vehicle to utilize for that. I would also direct folks to nekstrong.com. That's a new web portal that has been developed in partnership with many of the organizations that are represented here and others to create a online portal to help connect individuals, businesses, and communities with the resources that are available in our community. And that's an ongoing effort to be a comprehensive connector to all the resources. So check it out, share it with others. And if there are things that you think we should be featuring on that website, there's an easy button there to suggest additional resources. I also would maybe just highlight all the incredible work that's happened on the ground within our communities as a result of this crisis. There are so many community response teams that have been formed with local municipal leaders, volunteers, local nonprofits, really coming together to care for each other and neighbors during this time, and have contact information for groups that are doing that work, and would be great to see more of those develop as this continues to evolve. But there's a lot of strength and capacity within our communities to really celebrate.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Diane, did you have something you wanted to share?
Well, I don't know, somebody probably said this already while I was wandering around doing other stuff, but, it's a no-brainer that with the work world going online, that's a great thing for Vermont, because it's a great thing for the Northeast Kingdom. I mean, that's a wonderful thing, because there's no reason for people to have to be living in New York City or wherever else they were living. They can come and live in a beautiful environment and still do their job. So that's the thing we ought to be pushing. But on the other hand, from my standpoint, for what I do, that doesn't help poor people whose job may be, some low-income job that they don't have a job at all, and their world is really going to be negatively impacted by the fact that everything or more things will be online. So I guess it's double-edged sword.
Thank you. Jody, how about you? Do you have anything else that you'd like to share in terms of strategies or resources available to help our region?
I would say that the recovery plan that the NEK Collaborative has come up with, and we've touched on a bunch of those areas. I would say all of them actually, but we do have a strategic document that we have formed for this region that highlights almost everything that was brought up on this call, that we're going to be using as our roadmap through the recovery period. And so I know, Catherine, and you can chime in terms of the specifics about it and getting that out, that's going to get out to the public soon. But Dave's holding up his copy. But I think that the reason I bring that up is that I think that now is the time for us kingdom-wide to start to have a very strong coordinated voice. And we've done a lot of work since February and March with these groups and all of this coordination and people coming together. We've heard it throughout this entire call. And now it's time for us to start moving forward with one voice and advocating for ourselves at a state level, at a federal level, even internally within our own communities, but coming up with that voice for ourselves. And there's been so much work done. If we don't seize that moment right now to take that next step, I think we've missed a real opportunity. So I guess that's where I would leave it is, and there is work that's been done around that. So Catherine, and if you wanted to chime in behind me about the recovery plan, maybe just list off the 5 things that simply to everybody, but I think it'll reiterate how important it is.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jody. So through individual community conversations with experts and leaders across the region and the NEK Collaborative Board, and building on many of the community engagement sessions that have already happened, the board built this recovery plan, which has 5 priorities: broadband, education, small business support, housing, and cultural and civic infrastructure. We'll be going live with that plan Tuesday next week through an email and with our website. And then we'll be working with all of you and partners and funders to advance the priority recommendations within each of those 5 priority areas. So the plan is really a start to hopefully build momentum for collective action to ensure that we emerge from this crisis stronger. And we need everyone working together to help make that happen.
Great, thanks. Sheila Reed from Senator Sanders' office. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I would want to offer you the opportunity to speak too for the senator's office if you want to.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't gonna walk away without saying something.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I think I know every person in this chat room right tonight, but because this is my community too. I'm sitting in Reigate, where I've been for a very long time now, since March 18th, I think. But I want to say to you that every time I now remotely see Bernie, the first thing Bernie says to me is, how are things in the Northeast Kingdom? I mean, and so I'm always prepared to answer, and quickly, because he wants to know. He really cares. And I think, I love your, I took 5 pages of notes. Ben knows this. He's been another. Yeah. I'm a note taker. Yeah, I'm a note taker. It'll take me about 3 days to look at this, and then I'll have it ready for the next time I talk to Bernie. But he, as you all know, I'm sure, because you read the papers, right? He's in DC, and the Senate is attempting to negotiate the next COVID relief bill. They're stuck, as we all know. So it's traumatic times. I mean, one of the things I got from tonight, just on a federal level, is we need a massive infusion of more funding in all of these areas, in arts, and culture, and in our education system, childcare, everything. So I will take this back to him. I really appreciate hearing from all of you. I've missed you, and at least it's good to see your faces. And please stay in touch with me if you want something from the senator or his office. You know where to find me. I hope, anyway. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheila. And thank all of you. We're at the end of our time, and I think Nick is going to give us an update on how to get back to the kind of closing session. I would ask that we kind of all come back together if you can. But I just want to say, it really is such a pleasure to hear your voices and to hear your great ideas. There's just so many. And Diane, I feel sometimes I can get pretty down about where we are right now. I can be pretty pessimistic. And then the other times I think I'm more along with Jody about this is the greatest opportunity for our region since, the Back to the Land movement, or, this idea to reverse some kind of unfortunate trends in our communities. And boy, we have to be bold to really seize this moment. And I just really appreciate all of you being on the line for your community and wanting to step up to take it, to move us forward. So with that, Nick, can you bring us to where we need to be?
Okay. Well, isn't it a miracle when technology works so smoothly? Appreciate the support of all our technical team here. And Margaret, you're on so that you can let everyone in?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, thank you. So not a huge discussion on agriculture, but a really interesting one and a great cross-section of leadership engaged in that conversation. We want to just take a couple minutes to debrief a little bit on the 2 topics on the table, the cultural and civic institutions conversation, and then the local food systems and food access conversation. And I'm going to ask Ben Doyle, who facilitated the cultural and civic institutions conversation, to share some reflections about what he heard and kind of what some maybe things that it added up to. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks. It was a really quick 2 hours. It was really a wonderful conversation, a great group, and clearly a lot of people who care deeply about their community. I think, if I had to summarize the major ideas that I came out, I saw one, again, how critical our cultural and civic institutions are to the community in defining who we are as a region. And that was a theme in and of itself, this desire to really think about the kingdom, as a kind of region and how we fit into that statewide perspective. So the desire to work regionally to support these institutions. But I also saw, in addition to that passion for what we have, what I thought was a real enthusiasm for the willingness to be bold and reimagine our cultural and civic organizations, both in the way that they coordinate with one another, that they partner with one another. What I wrote down is a willingness to rethink and reimagine how we fund, who we include in our kind of civic infrastructure or cultural institutions, how people are invited into the circle to participate in civic life, and who leads those organizations, or what does the the construct of leadership that we have right now, how can that even be reimagined to, again, if the goal is we all want to come out of this with a more equitable economic recovery, we really need to think about those kinds of things. And then maybe perhaps on a more kind of concrete level is just maybe formalizing, looking for ways to formalize partnerships and coordination between different organizations, ultimately to kind of cut down on both human capital and financial drain to maintain our cultural and civic infrastructure, right? And so, how can we share buildings? How can we share systems that make that kind of infrastructure more sustainable? And then on a really granular level, Paul, really talking about how are we paying for the physical infrastructure that we're going to need to be resilient coming out of COVID, to prepare for future pandemics. And really what we're talking about here is like HVAC systems, right? How are schools going to pay for that? How are all of our public buildings going to pay for that? And so those are real, we went from some really bold willingness to think big to very specific action items. And I think a lot of those I know that they were captured in the notes, and I think there's some great stuff there for the task force to look at. So I just want to thank the group for what I thought was a really good conversation.
Thank you so much, Ben. And Nick Kramer, who's capturing these notes and bringing them together, will summarize at the end how we'll be back in touch with you with notes and links and so forth. I'll start to summarize the conversation on agricultural, where we are with the food system and food insecurities in Caledonia County. There are limits and there are barriers and there are challenges around storage, the need for slaughter facilities, the need for distribution coordination. There are some really good work going on around food aggregation with the Center for an Ag Economy, with Green Mountain Farm Direct. There's some fascinating different levels of food that's being distributed at the very local level, neighbor to neighbor, by Country Store and Craftsberry as partners with Pete's. And it's sort of like things have sprung up in lots of different ways with food shelves and with distributed meals, with Veggie Van Go working with the hospital, transportation being another of the big challenges. But with all that, there's still hunger, and there's still, as someone mentioned, it's not always just hunger. It's sometimes the inability to figure out where you're going to find the dollars to afford nutritious, local, and good food for you. That all of this spikes with the loss of the $600 additional payments that were going out for unemployment. And we also talked about the pivots that farms have gone through, where Pete's Greens went from a CSA with 300 and some odd customers to suddenly there's 800 people who want to get involved in the CSA. They're looking for food security that way. And how the market challenge of shifting into new places is really difficult. So there's lots of farms and places that have gone through short-term pivots, but are these also long-term pivots, or will markets come back? And the uncertainty in the marketplace, which is sort of fundamental. We rush to plan, we rush to organize, and yet we don't really know what we're organizing for or for how long, because the market is changing so rapidly. And that leads to anxiety and tension. And certainly the dairy farm community is feeling that extremely. They can't control the price of milk. They were seeing a little bit of a bump back before COVID hit, after some really tough years. And then COVID hits. The amount of money that's going to farmers to fill back losses from the state isn't going to meet their back losses, and it doesn't change the situation that they're probably facing additional losses now. So really tough situation there. There's a lot more work to be done. The food distribution system, people described it as in lots of ways, and the creativity and good work that people are doing, but maybe it's not really a full system yet. And I think that John from CAE really summarized it well at the end, where he said, you know, we know we're not done, but when you think about all the creative work that's been done all over the state of Vermont in the last few years, you know, and you got to say the Center for an Ag Economy was a flagpole of that work, really raising the idea of the food system renaissance in Vermont, that all that work has contributed to Vermont getting to a place where we're much more ready than we would have been, much more organization, much more distribution, much more localized response folks in place. And thank goodness that that's true, because people have stepped up. My closing reflection on the ag system is in Caledonia County is, you know, what an amazing county it is with the agripreneurs, the strength of small farms, the strength of dairy still, the leadership of the Center for an Ag Economy and the hospital and others doing such great work town by town to support their neighbors. It's Caledonia County is a small county in Vermont relatively, but it's certainly a leader in a lot of this work. And you set a high mark, and you also set a great example of sort of patriotism for place, patriotism for the kingdom, strength and working together and building a stronger fabric for the future of Vermont. So, you know, good on you all. Good on agriculture, food systems leadership. That's my summation. I know I missed a lot, but let's turn to Nick. And we've got all this information. We've got video on this. We've got some notes that Nick's going to be distributing. Tell us what comes next, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So as Paul mentioned a couple minutes ago, we've had Eric and Janelle. Thank you to both of you guys for taking some, what I'm sure will be very detailed notes to capture these conversations. As soon as we get those back, we'll work to compile those, the contact information for anyone in the visiting team, and links to recordings of each breakout session in case you were in one and you were curious what was really the details of what was described in the other. A shout out to Kingdom Access TV for making that possible. They were with us tonight in recording. So we'll compile all of that into one document, a publicly accessible online PDF, which we will email back to everyone who registered, along with the link to the local solutions and community action team website. I'm posting that, and nope, that's not the right button. I'm posting both the link to the governor's local solutions and community action team best practices website, where they're compiling some of these ideas that we've been gathering for the last couple months from communities across the state, and a survey, which will also be in the follow-up email in case there were ideas that if you're falling asleep tonight and you think, oh, shoot, I should have mentioned this. This is another way to capture some feedback, and please feel free to forward to anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight. So I think that's everything. Paul, help me out if I'm forgetting anything.
That sounds good to me, Nick. That's why I put you in charge. So I just want to thank the steering committee. Really great to have the team that framed this session. I want to thank Kathleen from the collaborative, Dave from the NVDA for your leadership. I see so many other people who are doing tremendous work for the future of the kingdom, Tara, Tricia, John, and all of you. In Vermont, we are stronger together. There's a fabric that we're weaving even when we're not aware of it. The work that one person does for the common good connects to everybody else, and we are strong, and we will manage COVID, and we will build a better Vermont because of COVID. We will respond. And it's a great honor to be partners with so many of you, and to see you tonight, and for you to give us a couple of hours to contribute to this process. Deeply appreciate it. Deeply appreciate what you do for the good of your community, and onward and upward for a stronger Vermont. Thanks a million for being with us. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Right.